have two stories today that I'd like to share, and they both have one thing in common, which is they have ties to a town called Framingham, Massachusetts, which is a town that I grew up in. So when I was trying to think of what kind of video I wanted to make today, these two stories popped into my mind. So I did a little bit of research, and it was very interesting to see how much I actually remembered and how much my mind had kind of filled in the blanks and provided me with some information that actually wasn't accurate to both stories. The first story is about a man named Stephen Fagan, who back in 1979 had kidnapped his two daughters, then ages 2 and 5, and moved them down to Florida. Reading from CNN.com, Fagan disappeared in October 1979 with his daughters, then ages 2 and 5. He hid the true identities of the girls and himself, and over the past 2 decades, passed himself off variously as a law professor, a psychiatrist, and a CIA agent. Fagan maintains he was trying to protect the girls from their mother, who he claims was a neglectful alcoholic. While hiding out in Florida, Fagan reinvented himself, taking the name Dr. William Martin. This guy was reaching for the stars. He married into a wealthy family and lived in a Palm Beach mansion, drove expensive cars, and was a member of some of the most exclusive clubs in Palm Beach until his arrest back in 1998, after a relative tipped off the authorities. Just 11 days after he disappeared with his 2 children back in 1979, Fagan was in Florida applying for a driver's license under the name William S. Martin. Apparently he'd stolen the social security number of a deceased boy in Massachusetts too, and that's partially how he was able to recreate his new identity. I remember the house that he and his wife had actually lived in. It was all over the news reports. And it was crazy that it was a house that I used to pass all the time. And the story was getting a lot of coverage on the news. And I remember his daughters, who at the time of his arrest, they were now in their early 20s. And they stood by their father. You could kind of understand why, because he had told them that their mother had passed away, and he was really the only parental figure in their lives. And so you can just imagine after 20 years, this woman, comes out of the woodwork with the police, and she's saying, "Hey, I'm your mom, I'm not dead." And both of these grown-up daughters are now looking at her like, we have no idea who this person is. And, some people said that, maybe the father, had brainwashed his kids. It's amazing that someone could be lying about their life for over 20 years. I mean, you would have to have told, the same lie and retold the same lie, so many times, kept all these facts straight in your head to maintain that lie. And to be able to do it for that long, you had to be really convincing. And apparently in the 20 years that he was on the run, he wasn't even really running. He just went down to Florida. He moved into a mansion. He had been married 3 more times after he kidnapped his 2 daughters. And he said that he hadn't had a job in those 20 years. So he just married wealthy women, and they just kind of supported him. And he survived for a really long time like that. I wonder, there had to have been a point where his daughters, who would be in their 40s by now, must have thought to themselves, well, I mean, if he was lying about our mom not being dead, and then lying to all of our friends and neighbors about, who he was, what else could he have been lying about? But it's just crazy. I remember them saying, well, we love our dad. He's the only parent that we know, and we support him. So that's the first kind of crazy story that I remember from my old town. That was a long time ago. It was over 20 years ago. The second story is a really crazy one. This one I remember pretty well. I knew the exact house that it took place. And in fact, this house was, maybe only a mile and a half away from where I grew up as a kid. So yeah, this story was nuts. We read now from CelebrateBoston.com. Burnt ZD Murder. On August 29th, 1995, A 40-year-old upper-class insurance executive argued with his wife over a pan of burnt ziti, which led him to kill her and mutilate her body. Richard Rosenthal strangled his wife to death, carried her out to the backyard in Framingham, and dissected her body. With a rock, he smashed her face beyond recognition and placed her heart and lungs on a stake as a symbolic gesture or trophy. The burnt ziti murder case is one of the most grotesque crimes in the history of the state and brought to the forefront major concerns about violence against women in the Commonwealth. Richard Rosenthal did not have a criminal record. He was a highly paid executive in a prominent insurance company. One would not believe him capable of such a crime, but the shocking murder was committed. Laura Rosenthal was dissected with her heart and lungs removed. There was so much blood in the backyard that the fire department decided to hose down the lawn and wash it away. It was reported that she was referred to as Jane Doe on the arrest report because she could not be visually identified. After Rosenthal mutilated his wife, he partially concealed her body under a pile of mulch, took a shower, packed their 4-month-old baby girl up with the diapers and car seat, and drove off. He later followed a car to a house in Marlborough and made strange comments about gun control, and the residents called the police. When officers confronted him in his car, Rosenthal was quoted as saying, "That is blood. I had an argument. I overcooked the ziti." Presumably, the alien delusion explained why he ritualistically removed her vital organs after killing her and placed them on an 18-inch stake to assure that the alien was really dead. He also claimed an encounter with a supernatural dead rat, either as a false idol or sign of prophecy. At the trial, the prosecution procured witnesses that said Laura had gone to work with black eyes in both 1990 and 1993. The assertion was that there was a pattern of domestic abuse by Rosenthal. He countered by saying she had fallen on her face on one occasion and had punched herself in the face the other time. On November 7, 1996, the jury rejected Rosenthal's insanity defense, and he was found criminally responsible and given a life sentence without the possibility of parole as punishment for this shocking crime. So I remember this crime pretty well. It had happened only about 1.5 miles from where I lived. The road that it happened on was full of new housing developments. All the houses there were pretty nice. And I remember a story that came out not long after the murder where the real estate agent had said that a new couple had bought the house where the crime occurred, and because of the history, they got a really good deal on it. One thing that surprised me, and I certainly didn't intend this to be humorous or funny, is I always thought that it was the wife that burned the ziti, and this guy just snapped. He just had a mental breakdown. But after reviewing the story, apparently he's the one who had burnt their dinner, and maybe she leaned into him a little bit, and he just went off the deep end. So really, really horrible story. For a pretty long time after the murder, I remember people used to drive by that house just to see where it happened. That was a pretty crazy crime that had happened not too far from where I grew up.